Our next speaker is Steve Wolfe. He is president and co-founder of the Beyond Earth Institute, a policy think tank committed to developing the policy and legal framework to enable the creation of economically vibrant communities beyond Earth. Steve will share with you the findings from a recent Beyond Earth study on options for financing large-scale infrastructure and habitats. Tim Chrisman was a participant in that study. Steve is also Deputy Executive Director for Global Spaceport Alliance and partner at CWSP International. He serves as the Space and Board of Editors for the Journal of Space Philosophy, which I'm eager to ask about. Steve served in Washington as the Executive Director of the Congressional Space Caucus and drafted the Space Settlement Act of 1988. The bill was signed into law as part of the NASA authorization bill. Steve is also the author of The Obligation, a journey to discover human purpose on Earth and in the cosmos. Steve, welcome to your first visit. I'm glad you've been here all day. The screen is yours.
So much, Lee, and thank you, Tim, and everyone. Great program so far. Really, congratulations. And I've certainly been tracking what the Foundation for the Future has been doing, and so much energy, so much enthusiasm. So hats off to you guys. This conversation today is really exciting about how we're financing space, right? Laura kind of teed it up really nicely with all of the amount of money that's pouring into this market right now, $14.5 billion. And growing, right? 50%. If we go 50% year over year, there's going to be quite a huge amount of capital coming in. And I think what I'm trying to do with this project that the Beyond Earth Institute is looking into is saying, okay, that's great, but how do we then leverage what's emerging as sort of a tide into sort of more of a tidal wave? How could we really drive this investment ultimately to creating a very large scale, to enable large scale infrastructure investment, leading ultimately to communities living beyond Earth? I mean, I think a number of us, if not everyone on this call, is very interested in this future where humankind is moving beyond this Earth. We're becoming a multiplanetary species, and we're kind of embracing that as a philosophical meme, if you will. And so all of us are focused on how do we get to there from where we are from this point. And so much of the activities around how do we do it technologically, but really, one of the hardest bits is how do we do that financially? So we're going from $14.5 billion invested last year, but we're really talking about many tens of billions of dollars into the hundreds of billions of dollars of the kind of investment that are needed in terms of having a robust civilization of sorts around the moon, around Mars, in free space, and so forth. So how do we get from here to there? And I think that's what I want to dig into. And I know I only have a few minutes. I've got way too many slides, so I apologize for that. I'm going to try to make it not seem like I'm rushing, and you'll have to cut me off as well. So I'm going to actually set my timer here too. So I try to keep this going. I'm sharing. You guys could see my screen now.
Yep, you are not in presentation mode yet.
I am looking. All right, so I'm going to presentation mode here. 1 second. All right. So yeah, I'm really going to talk about a Beyond Earth study, financing communities beyond Earth. Happy to be here again. Just a second on Beyond Earth Institute, who we are. We are a think tank, a policy think tank. Our mission is to establish and sustain a policy and legal framework that enables economically vibrant communities beyond Earth. So we're distinguishing ourselves in that way. We're focusing on areas including what are declarations that could be made about establishing communities beyond Earth as a national and international goal. We're very interested in the science and technology that enable this kind of future, and how do we create policies around that. We're interested in rule of law, norms of behavior, property usage rights, permitting criteria, those sorts of things. And ultimately, this last bullet is about how do we create policies that are most effective at enabling the financing for this kind of activity. So in this particular project, we did a review. We wanted to take a step back, do a review of the historical and current financing mechanisms for large-scale infrastructure investments, both in space and just in general. Then we reviewed and evaluated a series, 3 select proposed models. One of those was Tim Crispin's your model. We wanted it was important that these models were well conceived and well thought out. We did a workshop on each one of these. We had a group of evaluators, and I'll list them for you in a minute. And they did sort of a qualitative review and a quantitative review. We had them answer a survey, and I'm going to share the survey responses to you. So this is actually you'll see this for the first time, Jim, and it should be interesting. So very briefly, financing of large-scale space development, what does it mean? What are the approaches? It's really 3 things. One is direct government financing, right? And we know this. The government it can inject funding to help to create an economy, certainly a space economy. We've been doing that from Apollo through the ISS and so forth. So, we're really looking at the science and exploration aspect of it. Certainly national security is pumping direct government financing, but we know that these kinds of activities are not sustainable, right? So we know that as soon as there's a change in national policy, as what happened after Apollo, all of that effort now was put on hold, was sidelined, because there wasn't a robust commercial economy surrounding this activity. And hopefully now we're actually transitioning to something different. Of course, now there's a public, then there's a private investment. So if you're going exclusively private, there's debt capital, equity capital, private equity, venture capital, donations. These are various ways that you could collect capital in order to finance your space activities. And we see a lot of this going on right now. And certainly, of course, a lot of talk about SPACs. SPACs came on very strongly. We know there's a little bit of a retreat on using this, but it's certainly not going away as a mechanism for raising significant amounts of cash to fund private space activities. But then, of course, we're recognizing that really it's this partnership, right, between the public and the private, and coming up with a creative mechanism whereby we're working together to stimulate a certain kind of direction in where we want to go in space, right? So historically, we are familiar with things like the Transcontinental Railroad, the Tennessee Valley Authority. I like Sematech. A lot of you might not be familiar with that, but that was in the 80s. Japan was eating our lunch in microprocessors, and the government with industry put together Sematech, and we did a crash course in reviving the American Sematech industry, and it was very successful. PPP for NASA, those of you who follow this are very familiar with, after decades of cost plus financing of projects, NASA finally dipped its toe in the water for partnering with commercial companies through the COTS program, which ultimately was extremely successful. For scant $800 million, they developed 2 new launch systems and 2 automatic cargo spacecraft. It was successful, and they're certainly continuing this process through the CLIPS program, the Viper program, the Artemis human lander system, and of course the very recently announced the commercial LEO destination program. So NASA, and as mentioned, the DoD as well, are recognizing that, why do we need to build something when we can buy it off the shelf, when there are willing and able commercial partners in the market that are willing to partner with us. So other government incentives that can be utilized to help to stimulate space activity, loan or debt guarantees, low interest loans, tax incentives. There's zero tax for GRG is a common refrain among space advocates, certainly cash subsidies, so these kinds of things. But I would say that these kinds of mechanisms would be packaged, right? So they may have value as standalone to stimulate one way or another, but probably better to be packaged in an overall program. So really, how are we finding the right finance models for large scale infrastructure and habitat projects? That's really what the Beyond Earth Institute is really trying to grapple with. We're not trying to come up with an absolute answer. And what I thought, now I'm going to share with you the organizations that we've been taking a close look at. And one thing's interesting is that all of these groups, Tim included, were saying, hey, listen, I'm not saying that we have all the answers. We're putting something down on paper and we're asking people to engage in this conversation. And that's really what's so exciting about this. And even as you see this, some of the guys kind of were communicating with each other about how they might work together. So these are not competing ideas. These are just ideas that are out there that are getting us to think. Ultimately, how will these plans be structured and so forth? That's yet to be determined, but we think that is a direction we have to go. We held 3 workshops last summer, and let me just get into this. These are our evaluators. You may recognize some of these folks that have been involved in financing and investment and so forth. And then let me just get to it. We asked our evaluators to look at each one of these proposals or models along these various criteria for comprehensiveness and completeness, chances of success, financial soundness, diversity, and enabling communities beyond Earth. So let's get to it. I think we're going to start with the Lunar Development Cooperative. I am not going to do these plans justice in a few minutes, but I just want to give you an overview. And if you come to our website, or if you certainly reach out to me, I can share with you more information on these. But the Lunar Development Cooperative would be an organization that finances and delivers affordable public services through location-based service access fees to public and private entities developing facilities and habitats on the moon. The way I like to think of LDC is this is a turnkey municipality on the moon, where they are going to provide everything that you need to construct a facility on the moon for your purposes, whether it's for government purposes, private purposes, or manufacturing, or tourism, whatever it might be. So it is public-private organization. Shares would be publicly traded. The government ownership, according to their plan, would be limited to 49%. So they feel that it's better not to have government have control over this. They feel that their governance is strong in keeping this from becoming corrupt, if you will, through a board of directors, board of advisors, and an inspector general. The LDC collects usage fees for services provided and infrastructure provided. Now I can't see. Oops. I'm sorry. The infrastructure provided increases overall value to the investors and participants. This is a list of services. So it ranges from power, water, trading post, insurance, regulatory oversight, security, healthcare. Think of your town or city and think of all the services that you could get through the city, and they potentially could be provided at. So I like this model in that it's kind of all inclusive in that regard. Now, let me see. Now comes the evaluation. So I will say that I think our evaluators were a very conservative lot. And it was a small sampling of evaluators too. It might change if we had a larger sample. However, we have a score for comprehensiveness and completeness. And there were a number, under each one of these categories, there were a number of questions. So, but just in the interest of just sort of putting this aggregate information up, I just thought I'd share this with you. So you see these mostly in the mid-range. They got high, and this is on a scale from 1 to 10, so they're mostly in the mid-range. Clarity was a little bit better, and certainly they got points for diversity. So now let's look at the Space Corporation Act. This is Tim's group. Now, Tim, I'm sure I'm not going to do this justice, so I apologize in advance. But the Space Corporation Act, or the Space Public-Private Advanced Commercialization Enterprise Corporation Act, is proposed to be introduced in Congress by the Foundation for the Future. If passed, the corporation would establish in the United States a federally chartered infrastructure development corporation for space activities, okay, in a nutshell. So they're US chartered public-private corporation. They're publicly traded on a modeled after ComStat, according to their literature. Government ownership is a minimum of 51%. So interestingly, they're taking the position that actually we want the government to have ultimate control versus the prior plan. It has authority to allocate funds through grants, space bonds, space commercial development loans, and similar to SBI loans and so forth. And they, according to their research, they would generate $150 billion in new economic activity. I think of the Space Corporation Act as a place that is, I would say, a little bit more market driven, right? In terms of what are we seeing holistically are the needs to build out the space economy. Is probably also is more better in terms of the incremental approach, right? So we're at a particular stage right now in terms of building out the space economy or the cislunar economy. So this would actually work to sort of evolve as the markets evolve. Examples of space-based activities that have immediate commercial activity potential. Tapping into clean energy resources. I would imagine that includes space solar power, mining of asteroids, developing safe venues for scientific experiments. I guess we could talk about shirt sleeve habitats in orbit, tapping the resources of water on the moon and asteroids and so forth. So there are clearly well-defined areas here. I know I'm running out of time, so we're almost there. The evaluators were a little bit similar to the to the cooperative idea in terms of their overall evaluation in the mid ranges, but it gets high points for clarity. So that's important. Bank of Space, which is another interesting concept, and it varies significantly. And now we've got actually I'm going to share the infographic that they have. This is a traditional, or I should say, a neo bank. So people would invest and make deposits into this bank, knowing that this bank is going to take a portion of that money and invest it in space projects. So it's ideal for people who want to, make a financial contribution to space, but don't want to necessarily put their money at risk. So it has all the FDIC controls and so forth. And over time, as the assets of this bank built up over time, greater and greater amounts of money would be made available for developing infrastructure and ultimately habitats in space. FDIC insured, people can invest. They're looking for initial capitalization of $50 million, not that much. Overall, it would have a national bank charter regulated by the OCC. It's all digital, and it would gradually increase the higher and higher risk and so forth. So, so this is kind of more concise, more traditional, different from this, basically totally letting the market to a degree dictate where this money is flowing. And so this, in terms of the evaluation, they actually overall got higher marks than the other two plans. I think that might have something to do with the clarity. Certainly, they have very pretty slides, so I think in terms of clarity that helps. And overall, it was complete. Chances of success were a little bit higher. Financial soundness was pretty high, and diversity was okay, and then clarity was very good. And so this is, these are, this is kind of the beginning, and I'm going to stop sharing. Here's my contact information, though. Please do steve@beyondearth.org. Please feel free to reach out to me, anytime on this. We are looking for other people to engage in this activity, in this project, and it really is just the start. I think we need to continue to ask this question and to come up with recommendations that can be put forward.
It's really
I'll leave it
fascinating,
there.
Steve. Yeah, really interesting way of going about the project.
Mhm.
Talk about, were there other mechanisms that you chose not to include in this round, or was it difficult to find the ones that you did, and you're not seeing a lot of opportunities?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Actually, I kind of had my ear out and was eager to find additional models, and I was just coincident. Like I said, I had my ear out and I spotted these three, and then I thought that the others would have materialized, and to be honest, I haven't really seen them.
Yeah.
I would like to see more. So certainly, if people are familiar with, again, all three of these models, a lot of energy, a lot of consideration went into thinking all of the aspects through. So that's what we're keen on, and also to, next phase of this would be involved in getting the financial folks together, getting different folks together, and brainstorming this, and where can this go?
Yeah. Yeah, I thought your opening where you talked about hundreds of billions was something that more people need to be talking about, right? I mean, when you think about comparing aerospace to oil and gas and just the sheer amount of investment in R&D and activity and infrastructure, you learn a lot when you invest those kinds of dollars, and space just hasn't had that opportunity. So a good point to make.
Yeah, no, and I mean, that's a challenge because there's literally nothing there yet, and so you're looking to, folks just aren't going to put that kind of money. And I think but on the other hand, as soon as there's some kind of proof of concept with the cooperation of nation states, could be the United States or could be a combination of nation states that recognize that this is a direction that humanity needs to take for a lot of reasons. Then we could, once we have that proof of concept, then I think that kind of funding will start to open up.
Yeah. What did you mean by diversity in this scoring?
Diversity in the sense of diversity in terms of gender, race, inclusion, with regards to in that sense. And I think some of it, it was interesting addition that came up as we were sort of talking about this. And, obviously diversity is an important dimension of everything. And obviously you want space to be open and equitable for everyone who's interested in going. So,
Yeah, I didn't see anything in the proposal descriptions that would allow someone to make an assessment of that metric.
yeah, and that gets to, the amount of time that I had. I had to cut
Yeah,
corners somewhere, and I
yeah.
think in uh, yeah, and the Space Development Cooperative had very specific language about,
I see.
so they got sort of more points for that, and again, it was up to the evaluators to determine, how they assess that. So it was a challenging question for sure.
Yeah, and people need to be interested in
Hmm.
order to become engaged, and
Hmm.
that's sometimes a limitation as well.
Hmm.
Um, you didn't mention trash collection in LDS, that I noticed, but that was good. Why limit to 49%? You mentioned concerns about corruption, but it's interesting the Space Corporation Act, at least 51%, LDS less than 49. Why the difference there?
No, I love that, and and actually, I didn't really. Uh, I only noticed that in putting together these slides for this call, that really popped up to me. That really
Yeah,
hadn't
yeah.
popped up to me before, because clearly there's a slightly different mindset, right? So and this is something that you probably could spend a fair amount of time debating, and maybe people on this call have opinions as well. Do you want, is it really government that should have the ultimate say, or should it ultimately be the private investors, who could be large companies, but also could be small investors, could be different types, could be tenants, could be, people who have a different stake in the activity, and given maybe both are appropriate for their respective models, right? So Tim's model, under the corporation model, maybe it is better that government has 1% control, and under the LDC model, which is much more of a township type of model, maybe that's where you want you want non-government to have a slightly more control. So it's just I just think it's interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Now, your focus is on these large scale communities and getting there and sort of mapping out what those would look like. And you're leaving the initial small communities that will come first and perhaps for a long time to other organizations and experts, right? Talk about that decision and how tempting it was to um, not skip over that and say, well, if we can only get this little thing done, then we'll get to hundreds of millions and we'll get
Mhm.
to these major services. But like, talk about that decision.
Well, I think part of that has to do with recognizing that there's so much energy right now in the sort of the near term stuff. But I will, so there isn't any policy think tank that's saying, okay, that's all fantastic. So let's look at the longer term policies. That said, however, we're very interested in any policy that would enable more people to experience space, right? So, for example, we're very interested in what's going on right now with the commercial LEO uh, destination program at NASA, and we want to make sure that that's fully funded and that's up and running. So there's certain things that are enabling, right? So
Hmm.
there's a certain pathway that leads to these larger and larger habitats. We like to look at this as the expansion of the space is a bit of a numbers game, which is how many people are in space right now and how do you increase those numbers. So as
Yeah.
those numbers increase, we'll get closer and closer to that end result. So it's not just whereas this project on uh, models for large scale infrastructure and habitat, like I just discussed, it might be lean a little bit more towards the academic side of the discussion,
Mhm, mhm.
right? So, but if we're having that discussion now, when the time comes when we're really going to make that kind of investment, we'll have a body of knowledge to turn to. So that's one part of our thing, and then the other part is to look at what's happening now and how do we enhance and support drive, if you will, near-term policy as well. And it might
Yeah.
have to do with in terms of, are we researching, doing the right kind of research? How can we support greater research in certain areas and life support capabilities, space farming, and that kind of thing, which has near-term benefit, but it's also on the critical path to space settlement.
Great. Well, Steve, thank you for joining us and enlightening us and including Foundation for the Future's Space Corporation Act in your program.
Great. Thank you. Thanks again.